All right, folks. For as bad as 2024 was, I think with spring football, you can finally say, okay, forget it. Totally get it out of your mind. Spring means a new season. Spring means fresh football. And here we are. We got Logan Robinson here. Of course, Noel Game Day, owner and founder. It's a great site, your best resource for Florida State football. Logan, what's going on?
Doing good, Mark. Doing good. As we were discussing in the production meeting there, it has been a little bit of a different kind of scene and vibe going into this spring camp than what we were talking about last year at this time, where we had a big, strong presser from Mike Norvell going in on what he thought was going to be the strongest and fastest team. And he felt like there wasn't going to be much of a drop off from that 2023 team to the 2024 one. But man, was he wrong? And the 2-10 season, like you said, fans want to move on from that as quickly as possible. I think a lot of them were ready to move on from it last September. But now it's a new team, two new coordinators, a lot new coaching staff, and some questions to be answered both offensively, defensively, and special teams as well.
Well, Logan, you mentioned a new vibe this spring, but you're going to have to feel that vibe from a little bit further distance than you're used to because they have shut down media access, even for you.
Isn't that messed up? That's messed up. I mean, come on. I want to be out there to get my TikTok videos and get my tweet engagement, get my retweets and everything, but it's going to be a lot tougher now. It's something that we're not used to. One thing about Mike Norvell, he was one of those rare head coaches that allowed a lot of availability for media to be out there viewing practices. Yes, it was still very strict on what we could share, and mainly we were able to provide the positives out of practices. Couldn't be too critical, couldn't give away plays, obviously, and who's starting, who's limited, who's injured, all that kind of stuff. It was very strict as expected when you're going to get that availability. But now this year, at least starting with the spring, Mike Norvell put out a statement saying, he feels like this is the best for the team. It's not after Florida State went 2-10. He made sure to point that out, that it wasn't because Florida State had the worst season ever in their program history. And but the thing is, it definitely makes it to where it doesn't give us the best way of giving coverage to the fans, and it makes it a little bit tougher. You got to now go back into grabbing sources and stuff to try to get some insight of what's going on in those practices. It was going to be exciting to be out there. I wanted to be up there at least at some point in the spring, just because you have two new coordinators. There's a lot of question marks on that defensive side of the ball, of personnel specifically, of how Tony White is going to want to use that scheme and which players he feels like fits best. And there's so many different question marks because there's a whole range of different bodies that, could fit in that system. And there could be players that we didn't expect to maybe be as a starter or in the two deep. And then, offensively, you're trying to see how Thomas Castellanos works. You kind of already understand what Gus Malzahn's going to be running offensively since he's been in the game for so long. But you want to see how Castellanos is working, definitely with some of these transfers that came in the wide receiver room with Deuce Robinson, Squirrel White. And to the offensive line, Herb Hand, I would love to see him and how he coaches his players up, as there's been a major need and necessity for development that was a complete letdown during Alex Atkins' tenure. So, yes, there's definitely the positive side for whatever FSU feels like fits them best, and I understand it. I don't think it came too crazy much of a shock for us on the media side. And of course, it still stinks that we can't be there and view them and such. But we were spoiled during during Mike's first 5 years and got to be in there and all that kind of stuff. It just is what it is, and we will continue to do our thing and cover the team as best as we can.
Well, Logan, since we started the deep dive on the coaching staff with 6 new coaches, of course, the headliners you hit on, Gus Malzahn and Tony White. So Tony White has led 4 consecutive defenses that ranked in the top 25 in the nation. The Florida State defense, for as bad as the season wasn't atrocious, but certainly not FSU standard by any stretch. So what do you like about Tony White and his new staff?
I think, to me, we actually got to listen to him yesterday or Monday at the meeting, at the luncheon for the spring luncheon where you hear from Mike Norvell and his presser. Then you go off and you do tons of interviews with some of the staff members. And I'm sure I was not there, but I would imagine that a lot of the beat members were trying to get as much, interview juice, any kind of nuggets they can get from some of these coordinators. You're not going to get a ton from Gus Malzahn, but one thing about Tony White, he will dive in and give you some long, lengthy answers and detailed answers on some things. And I think he's got a big question mark going into this spring, like I just said, because of the personnel and which guys he feels like fits best. He's going to be going into this spring without a couple players on the defensive side of the ball with Jason Jenkins, who was a Tennessee transfer at the defensive end position. Then you've got two potential starters going into this next season at safety with Shaheem Brown. You've got Conrad Hussey. Those two guys will be missing the spring too. So he's already got a lot of work to do to figure out who is going to replace these guys. At least it's just in the spring. Those two guys on the safety room are expected to be ready to go in the fall. But, Tony's got to look at his linebacker room. Now John Papuchis owns that room and is coaching that, previously coaching defensive ends. So now he's going to be trying to figure out how this linebacker room works in this scheme. And then two, I think more importantly, is guys that are going to have to step up behind Daryl Jackson and on the defensive line, because you kind of know what you're going to be doing at the defensive end. But, I think there's going to be some guys that move on the inside. That's why it's very intriguing to me to see what Tony White can do. I think out of all of the hires, I think for FSU fans, that one probably stands at the top of where you feel really confident on where this team can go behind Tony White because of the success that he had previously. And he brought a few guys with him that was from familiarity with Stephon Thompson, a linebacker there, was all the way back with him at Syracuse, then Nebraska, and then James Williams coming over, as well as a pass rusher, a guy that wants to be out on the field more, be out there for 3 downs, and is mainly there to get to the quarterback, but he wants to be better in the run. So I think Tony White, I feel confident a little bit more on that side of the ball than I do right now offensively.
Okay. Offense, Gus Malzahn took many of us by surprise, because here's a guy who's obviously been a head coach, and once you elevate to within, Florida State fans know as well as anyone, within a couple seconds of winning a national championship, because that was at the Rose Bowl, of course, against FSU, and led a program, a top 10 to 15 program at Auburn, and then UCF, and then steps away and becomes an offensive coordinator. That you've got this strong offensive mind with Mike Norvell as the head coach, and you bring in a equally strong personality, a guy with a huge track record, so they can either make magic together, or there could be some kind of conflict because you got two large egos and big experience there. So what do you think about the Gus Malzahn hire?
So I think to him specifically, he wanted to lead the head coaching gig, as a lot of these other coaches that have been in the game. We just saw it. I mean, it's on the basketball side, but for Florida State fans, they'll relate to this because of Leonard Hamilton, someone that was finding a lot of success and just how the way that he did things, his old school approach, and was just wanting to develop guys and have those 3rd-year guys turn into being something special. And he, having to deal with the transfer portal and NIL, he said, that this is too much to handle. And, that basketball team was not performing well.
And not to interrupt, but we've had Chip Kelly recently step down at UCLA and say, I just want to coach X's and O's and players. I don't want to deal with all of that. Jeff Hafley stepped away from Boston College to go to the NFL to coach a position, to say, I just want to coach football.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to deal with all these other logistics and have to go through. It's almost political at some point, because you're having to battle so many different things, not just the NCAA, but you're having to work with the NIL, trying to garner enough money on the outside, trying to bring in your program, depending on what you got in your state. It's just so confusing and a lot to work with. And you have to build a staff on the outside as you have a general manager with Derek Ray, but you still got to find a big off the field staff to be able to handle all this beforehand. You just needed, high school relations. You had a director there. You maybe bring in 2, which Florida State now has a handful of a lot of high school recruiting personnel. But, it's almost, it's what Nick Saban built originally. And that's why they probably found so much success. They were early and ahead of the time, and they were able to be they were able to roll with that really nicely with Saban. But now you look at like Gus Malzahn, and he's like, this is, I like you said, I just want to coach football, and that's something that kind of came to a little bit of a shock whenever he was announced as being the next offensive coordinator for Florida State. Leaving UCF there, I think it was expected that probably those two were going to separate. And he had been given away play calling duties, and he gets it back from UCF. Some changes there with him and the Knights, and now, like you said, Mike Norvell and him have got to figure out a way that is smooth for Mike Norvell not to really affect too much of the play calling. You can't really do that. It's going to be all on Gus. And this puts Mike into a CEO role, which I previously had always thought that he was in. Now, fully, no. I mean, you can't do everything, and he certainly couldn't, because he was the play caller. He was the offensive coordinator. I know, Alex Atkins labeled as a co-offensive coordinator. That's fine, but he was not calling any kind of plays. There was never any of that. He helped in the run game and the game plan and getting things set for that on game days going into Saturdays, but Alex Atkins was not involved on that. That was all of Mike Norvell. And for Mike, now he steps back and he's able to go and take on these little things, or go, like we were just talking about, handle stuff that's more off the field now. I feel like more in college football than ever, and this gives him a shot to do that. And I think that actually fits Mike Norvell well. Of course, this is going to be a big change for him, and not being a play caller on the offensive side of the ball, something that he's got to adjust to. I'm really interested to see how that works and that relationship with Gus Malzahn, because this will be Gus Malzahn's offense. Yes, Mike Norvell will have a say in some things, but it's something he's got to adjust to, and it's going to be interesting to see.
The College Football Show comes your way Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, with me hosting. We take your calls. We've got great guests. We go through the news of the day. It's every Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the main channel.